Good morning, good evening, good night, NBN, Entrepreneurship and Leadership.
Personally, I'm fascinated by the story.
Trust is an underrated weapon in the business landscape.
I'm a really, really strong believer in learning by doing.
What's the definition of success?
You're trying to come up with an answer to the question. But go ahead, Richard.
You could be right, but you're wrong. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night, Entrepreneurship and Leadership NBN channel listeners. Today on our show we have Ashutosh, who's coming to us, I believe, from India, and Kimon, who's also with me here in Krakow. Jenny, and if you start off with maybe briefly what you're doing now, but then go back into the past. And
okay.
Maybe talk about the origin, because you've had quite a varied career.
Okay. So, as of now, I'm 64 years old, and I'm currently running what I think is a very exciting platform, bringing stories of successful people from around the world. I've had an interesting conversation with Richard about his journey, and I've spoken to a little over 500 guests in the last 2 years. But let me start with telling you about my own story. So I was born in a middle-class home. My father was a very senior retired Army Brigadier General, highly decorated soldier, twice awarded by the President of India for once in battle, once in civil time. Two younger brothers, grew up in a very, very happy home. Went on to do my MBA from one of the premier business schools in India. And when I was 21 and a half, I joined British American Tobacco, or India Tobacco. So India Tobacco is a subsidiary of British American Tobacco. Worked through multiple divisions. And by the time I was 33, 34, I was appointed managing director of one of the group companies when we used to live in Singapore. That carried on for another 3 years. In 97, I quit the corporate world and I moved into aerospace. And I was head of Asia for the satellite group of Lockheed Martin and then the satellite group for Hughes. And then in 2003, when the chairman of Hughes told me, pack your bags and move to Germantown, Maryland, I discussed with my wife and I decided I'd had enough. So I quit the corporate world. I can talk about my family a little later. But when I wrote my first book in 2010, which was 7 years after I started my entrepreneurial journey, I said that on the 1st of April 2003, which is when I quit the corporate world, I woke up in the morning and I suddenly realized that I had no office, no assistant, no calendar appointment. And I said I suddenly realized I had joined the ranks of the educated unemployed in India. And, for about 5-6 months, I was 45 and a half at that time. That is when I said that, I've earned enough. I'm going to play lots of golf and I'm going to really retire early, which a lot of people like to talk about or at least fantasize about. But I realized in 2 months that I couldn't possibly be doing nothing and playing golf 7 days a week. So I started to look at various things to do. I had a small investment in a small hospital in Delhi. And when I started to look at the pharmacies inside the hospital, that's where I realized that here was an interesting opportunity waiting to be exploited. So I decided at that time that let me start thinking of what I can do. And I wrote my first business plan with the first line, which said, build Boots in India. Boots, as you know, is the UK's largest chain. And I was very familiar with Boots because I used to be in British American Tobacco offices 4 or 5 times a year. So I decided, this was an interesting model to follow. I'm not a pharmacist. I'm not, have no idea about the pharmaceutical industry, or I did not have any idea. But I said, I've had enough experience as a general management person. I hired a pharmacist and opened a small 300 square foot store. My assistant who was with me in Hughes had moved with me. And I remember she called my my wife and said that how on earth is Mr. Garg going to, pay my salaries by selling, a few medicines. No one believed me that we could build it into a strong chain. But as it so happened, the company grew, and over 14 or 15 years, it became India's largest chain of pharmacies. And when I turned 60 4 years ago, I decided that was the time for me to exit, and I sold the business. It was a nice business to sell at that time. Exited at the right time. Um, since then, I've done several things. I didn't want to get into active employment with anyone. I did not want to get into a routine entrepreneurship role, which would have meant 18, 20 hours of work. I've been a member of this incredible organization called the YPO, which also used to be called the Young Presidents Organization. So I've been a YPO member for 27 years. And, I was roped in to be the chairman of YPO for South Asia for 2 years, which, I had the time. So I was able to devote enough time to them. And, that's when I decided that let me do something different in terms of telling stories. Let me backtrack now a little bit. In 2010, I wrote my first book, which was my book titled The Buck Stops Here, My Journey from a Manager to an Entrepreneur. And that is when it was a big book. It was almost a 350-page book published by Penguin. And then once I started writing, I've always written. I've always written a lot. I've written for financial papers. I've had a column in some of the best-selling English magazines in India. So when I got my first book out, then somehow or the other, that little mind block which you have of not being able to write a book, that disappeared. And I wrote 6 books, and I've got my 7th book that has gone in for publication, which will be released in March 2021. So when I published my 6th book, which was a book titled The Brand Called You, a book that was entirely on personal branding, that is when I realized that here was an opportunity for me to start telling stories of people who are doing incredible work all over the world and are not normally spoken about, primarily because in almost every country, only 15, 20 people are spoken about all the time, when there are, in fact, thousands of amazing stories. So I said, let me start reaching out to multiple people, which I did through my own large network of friends. And then I started to say that, okay, now let me start reaching out to friends of friends. So, I started what I can now call my crowdsourcing of guests from, my existing guests. And I started asking everyone, please recommend 3 names. So Richard has also recommended a few people. And that's how it started to grow. Now, I had no idea this will grow into such a large platform, but it is growing very, very rapidly. I've got now 2 more hosts who've come in on board, and more want to come on board. So I think it's just evolving into something fascinating. I don't know what I'm going to do with it because I'm not doing it for monetization as of now, but maybe at a later date. People have started writing to me to start offering me sponsorships, etc. But I'm not taking anything right now. What is also very, interesting is, and I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about the platform and how it is evolving. But let me now take a step back again and talk a little bit about my family, because everything that I have been able to do is because I've had an incredibly supportive family. My wife, Veera, is an academician. She's an educator. She's a historian, and probably one of the well-known historians from India. She teaches at the American Embassy School, one of the senior-most IB teachers. And not only is she an IB teacher, but she also sets the global IB history paper. Every year she sets that paper. So she has been an incredible strength and an incredible support for everything that I have done. We have 2 sons. The older one is now 35. His name is Varun. He's an MBA from the London Business School, and he spent the first 13 years of his working life with American Express, and now is in Singapore. And now he is the senior director with Visa in Singapore. Our younger son is 33. He is a senior director with Procter and Gamble in the US. He now runs, or rather, he's now in Bentonville, Fayetteville. So he runs the Gillette brand for Walmart. And, that's my entire family. My brothers, everyone lives in Singapore. So out of all of us, my extended family, the only two people who live in India now are my wife and me. My interests, as I said, I write a lot. I play the Indian flute. I love my golf. And I enjoy reading and listening to music. So that's a quick capsule. I mean, I thought it'll be quick, but it's taken me almost 10 minutes of talking to be able to give you my background.
Very, very interesting. I mean, from my perspective, you had just took some notes. There were several critical moments, and those are the things I like to focus on. Is the first one was the tobacco to aerospace. Mm-hmm. I mean, that does not sound like there's a whole lot of synergy. I mean, maybe unless you're just doing management, sort of general management. How did that happen and why? I mean, it seems like a completely unusual move to jump from tobacco to aerospace. India Tobacco is not just a tobacco company. It is primarily tobacco, but it also owns one of the largest chain of hotels in India. It's in food products. It's in agricultural products. They don't build spaceships though there, do they?
They don't, but I'm sure you know that India is one of the 4 major space powers.
Yes, but tobacco and spaceships, I didn't really see the
very different. But I had reached a level where. Sorry?
Exactly.
Maybe the astronauts can start smoking and be a bad role.
Absolutely. I think, I'd reached a level where I was more in general management by the time I was 35, 36 years old. So I was really taken in as the CEO of a large aerospace company.
Okay.
And I think those 8 years were probably the most fascinating 8 years I've spent because I was in an area that I had no idea about. And, I was involved in 2 large geostationary satellite launches.
Wow, cool.
And each satellite is about 6.5 tons. And
I assume they're quite expensive.
The satellite is about $250 million.
Exactly.
The launch is about $250 million. And the insurance is about $250 million. So
exactly. That's a big.
You don't want it to go wrong.
You can't afford it.
Not on your watch, at least.
Not on my watch, absolutely. But what's fascinating about these satellites is when they're up at 36,000 kilometers above Earth, and when they open up the entire solar panels and the solar arrays, from end to end, they're probably as large as a football field, just to give you a perspective, how big these big birds are.
That is, and there's a lot of space up there, but it's getting more and more cluttered. I don't know if have you heard much about the clutter, the space clutter? I mean, yes. Is that something that ever affected you in that, like the idea that I guess it could get destroyed? I mean, is there any issue with launching and risking? I mean, you have this massive investment and you have all that debris going around.
The surprising thing is that, or not surprising, but I mean, the amazing thing is that every piece of space debris is very carefully tracked.
Okay.
So unless if it is space debris, but if it's an asteroid, then you don't know.
Right. That appears out of nowhere. The debris. So they know every single piece of debris. So you can you can plan your launches in such a way that you're relatively safe.
Yes.
Okay. The Chinese shot down a satellite, or they fired a projectile and blew something up in the.
Correct.
And I can't think that they track all the bits of debris from that.
No, a lot of that, a lot of this destruction happens when a satellite is re-entering or when it's being damaged. Mm-hmm. And when it re-enters the space or the Earth's atmosphere, it burns itself up.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So I wanted to ask about, and if you look at your career, and thank you so much for this this expansive description, and on the one hand it looks like success after success, successful, good family, good degree, good career, so everything seemed to be going right. And if you come from and you were very, I wouldn't say you were very sort of truthful and accurate about it, but it didn't sound like you were sort of showing off or sort of making a big deal of yourself. You're just describing what happened, and other people could make a bigger deal about how successful they were and how wonderful it all was. But did you feel like an internal pressure to, quote, be successful, or were you brought up to think in terms of what you were doing for other people? I was just wondering where your if you looked at where your internal motivations came from to do what you did, was it more your environment, a product of your upbringing, or do you feel it's your character coming through in your life choices?
I think, Richard, it's a combination of both. My father, who I was extremely close to, I mean, till the day he passed away 6 years ago, I think I used to speak to him 2 or 3 times a day, and he was also used to live in Delhi, and I used to meet him for lunch 3, sometimes 4 days a week. You know, I used to drive down and, he and I were very, very close. From a middle class background where me and both my younger brothers are always told that the only thing that you have to be conscious about are your values and your ethics. And that's about it. And then he used to say that when you are, you know, when I was in school, when I wanted to grow my hair long and I wanted to, you know, whatever the fashion of the day was. And he always told us that, you know, remember that you must try and get accepted in society by what you have inside your head rather than the way you are, you know, looking or the kind of clothes you're wearing. Right. So I think those are things that always stayed with us.
So did you grow your hair long, or did that impact you? You did. Okay.
No, I did.
I've had the conversation with my daughter, actually, who has some tattoos. And tattoos are more and more common. It's incredible how tattoos have become much more common. And she was concerned about exactly this thing. Oh, do I have a tattoo that somebody can see? I don't know, maybe on my, is that something that would affect my business, my ability to do business? How will people perceive me? And it's exactly the same thing. So from your perspective, because I also told her actually the same thing, which no, it's actually what you are that matters. But
correct. But no, I mean, we did everything that we had to. I mean, I had long hair. I put a little band around my head because it was.
So you were a hippie, basically.
In those days, maybe, maybe. But the other thing that I was taught by my father, and I told both my sons, is that every morning when you are standing alone in front of the mirror shaving, and if you can look at yourself and say that I did not knowingly harm anybody, I did not do anything wrong, that's the only justification you need to give to yourself. If you can look at yourself and say that, you don't need to worry about anything anyone else may say to you. And I think that is something that I have held as a value all my life. That if I know I'm right, that's good enough for me.
Is it okay to ask a challenging question? I mean,
sure.
Yeah. So some people would say, and I can give my version of this story because I sometimes look back and think my opinion has changed. You worked in the tobacco industry. Many people regard the tobacco industry as a sin industry, like gambling or alcohol. And did you ever have qualms about the fact you were devoting yourself to a product that in some ways does harm people?
First and foremost, when I joined the industry in 1979, there was not so much of an anti-tobacco lobby. That is one point. But as I started to understand it, while I never smoked for some strange reason, even though everyone who works at cigarette companies are allowed to get free cigarettes, I've never smoked. But there are 2 or 3 different aspects to it. Number one is that it's an industry that supports a very, very large number of farmers, right? So therefore, and I'll tell you an interesting story. When I was much younger, I was a part of a team that was going to buy tobacco, and I remember this one instance where there was an open Jeep with a box full of cash kept inside it. And there was just one guard who would be sitting there with a stick. And that Jeep with all the cash was in an open area, which was probably over 50 or 60 square kilometers, was driving around with the buyer who was going and inspecting bales and paying cash on the spot. And the jeep was safer than the vault of a bank because every farmer knew that if this money gets stolen, there'll be no one who will buy the crop and the crop will rot. So the point I'm trying to make to you is that tobacco always has had, not always, but for a last 30, 40 years has had ethical issues. But when you're working for an organization at that particular time, those issues did not crop up in my mind.
Yes, because I remember my first business success was selling industrial automation, and we were selling labeling systems, and British American Tobacco in Poland was a big client of ours. And I remember the sales engineer came in and said, "Oh, we've got a good sales lead," and it was a very big project. So
correct.
He was very excited, and I suddenly found myself going through this rationalization that historically I would say, well, I would never work in tobacco because it's bad. And I thought, well, then we're going to put labels on the pallets of tobacco, and and I was thinking, well, someone has to do that. And I realized that, does the photocopier company that sells photocopier paper to British American Tobacco say no? Does the electricity company say no?
Yeah.
And I found that all my kind of prior rationalizations crumbled in the face of business reality. That
correct.
you really, and obviously there might be limits, like the secret police in a country like Belarus. You might say, I'm just not going to do business with these people, but somehow I managed to rationalize tobacco.
I have a different question. So you sound like, and I'm sure you are, like a super nice guy, and a lot of what you've been presenting is the ethical looking at yourself in the mirror, and but I have to believe that, because I actually, and this is one of the things I want to explore always, is that when you were growing up, did you play sports or did you do things competitively?
Sure.
And would you consider yourself a competitive person?
I am.
Yes.
I am very competitive. And see, you have to partition, life very, very differently. I mean, now when I play golf, I'm very competitive. But does that mean that, I've got to take the other guy's head off? My answer is no. Right?
But you want to win. The point is that there's no way. My take is that you built the largest pharmaceutical chain, pharmacy chain, in India. You definitely want to win. I think that has to be somewhere in there. You definitely want to win.
No, if I didn't have the desire to win, I wouldn't be pushing myself to do so many.
Yeah.
I mean, my podcast platform with 500 videos, I think is probably one of the larger platforms in the world with corporate stories. And it's growing by another 40, 50 every month. So yes, of course, I want to win.
So where does that come from? That's what I like to. So where do you think that you're just born that way? You think you're just like, are your brother, like, is it a family thing? Are your brothers also very competitive? Or is your family competitive? Where does it come from, basically, do you think?
So I would, step back, for example, I have a new book coming out on failure, and what my hypothesis is, if the parents in South Asia don't teach their children it's okay to fail. We're always told you have to be first in class in whatever you're doing. You have to make sure that if there's a line, try and figure out how you go to get in the front of the line, and so on and so forth. And I've said this for a long time, that I don't think this is the right thing to do. But I did grow up in an environment where it was extremely competitive. I mean, when I was growing up, India had a population of about maybe 700-800 million people. Today, we are 1.3 billion people, right? So there is always this need to be able to win. If you look at, say, admissions into business school, you probably will have 10,000 people applying and only 30 will get in.
Yeah.
Right? So therefore, competition is a part of life in our country. But do you, did I reach a stage where for me was win at the cost of anything? That was not true. And again, I would relate it back to the fact that there are a lot of things that we are taught as Hindus, where, I don't know if you've heard of one of the major Hindu books called the Gita, and I'm sure you've heard the word karma. It's bad karma and good karma, but karma is really what your deeds are. And if you do your deeds well, based on whatever you're supposed to be doing, the results will follow. So it's a combination of being ambitious, being competitive, and yet being able to neutralize the so-called negative impacts of competition and ambition with what you deserve to get, you will get.
You touched on something, and you started to say it, and I think your book, and I think that's actually the essence of what you're saying, is because now that I'm thinking about it, it is the way we manage. Because if you talk to anybody who's an entrepreneur, it is the way we manage failure. And in fact, it's the not the fear of failure, because I think it's the fear that paralyzes people more than the actual failure itself. People are afraid, what are people going to think of me? I was supposed to do this and I failed. And maybe is that possibly the thing, is that you were ready to do things that, and so I'm just saying, like, what's there, you said it's an enormous country. You have this incredible, basically competitive environment, and somehow you rose to the top. I mean, I'm just trying to identify, like, what are the things, and maybe is it possible that one of these things was actually that you were just like, you know what, if I fail, I'll try again, and I'll figure it out eventually. I mean, would you say that was the?
So in my narrative, it may have sounded like there's been absolutely no failure, but I mean, there've been incredible number of failures at work, as a professional manager, as an entrepreneur. I went with, I'm much older than both of you, but in the 1999 2000 .com boom, I mean, I must have put money into 3 or 4 different companies, and all of them went bust. So it's not that. Sorry.
Pet.com. Do you remember?
No, I didn't do pet.com.
No, I'm joking. There was this hilarious .com businesses, basically.
Yeah. I lost a lot of money at that time. But there have been failure in relationships. There have been failure in at work as an entrepreneur. So, the point again is, and again, that's exactly what I'm trying to write. I have a whole section on for entrepreneurs, where what do you do when you fail? And we've had some celebrated suicides because of an entrepreneur who was very big. And I was thinking about it, and I said, why would a person on a failure do this? Take the extreme step. And my realization basically was that it's not the hurt that is caused to you as an entrepreneur, which is the reason only that you take such steps, but society in general, in a lot of countries. And again, I've said that in countries which are much more risk-taking, for example, in California, if you fail as an entrepreneur, a lot of people say, okay, no problem, try again. But in some of the more conservative economies, if you look at, say, India today is changing, or if you look at Japan, or if you look at Germany, or these are, or Saudi Arabia, some of these countries, psychologically, they don't accept entrepreneurial failure very well. So therefore, there is a worry of an entrepreneur: if I fail, what will society say to me? You have investors, you have people who are other stakeholders, you have suppliers. A lot of them lose money, right? And then on top of all that, you lose your own credibility and fall in your own eyes. So I think it's a combination of all these things that affects entrepreneurial failure, rather than just one or two aspects.
That's very interesting. And I want to come back to that. And I was thinking about the challenges that an entrepreneur faces that they're not ready for. That I had a very elite education in the UK by British standards, but nothing prepared me for the life of being in business. And I remember very clearly when I first had to fire someone, and they'd done something unethical, and it was damaging to the company, and there was no question that I had to fire them. But I remember I really had a sleepless night, and I was thinking that nothing in my beautiful education prepared me for the reality of firing a young man who had he deserved it. It was not an issue, and just how to do it. And I was wondering if in your career, the things that you found that you struggled with, were there like your equivalents of that, the things that you really thought, well, I've got this beautiful, nice family, good education, and now I have to do this, and I just don't know how to handle that, or I'm not ready for that?
The answer is yes and no. I mean, when I was younger, it was very difficult at one stage to be able to turn around and tell someone that, oh, listen, you're not performing, and it's time for you to leave. But again, I was fortunate in a company like India Tobacco. The systems were so strong that if someone was not performing, the organization would beat them out and put them aside. However, as an entrepreneur, by the time I'm a late starter. I started when I was 45 years, or between 45 and 46. By which time I think I had become, battle hardened with 25 years in the corporate sector. So when I got people in, I did have the resilience or the strength inside me to tell a person you're fired. So I think that way I had a bit of an advantage.
Yeah, and so certainly very often the image of the young entrepreneur is absolutely challenged by the facts. That if you look into the facts, you see that many founders are around your age, and of course they've learned while someone else is paying them about these things, and they've seen about all those processes.
There's just one other point I'd love to add to this, and I think again I've spoken about this often. One of the reasons why entrepreneurs find it difficult to sack someone is because they are constantly worried that if I let go of a senior colleague, that individual's entire workload will come on to me. And therefore, I turn around and say, let me continue with a suboptimal colleague till I find someone else, because I don't have the time, inclination, or the bandwidth to take on more than my own role, because, in my own mind, I'm the strategist, I'm the founder, I'm the promoter, I'm the entrepreneur, I'm the person who runs strategy, et cetera, and I've hired all these people. So very often entrepreneurs do not take strong action because of the fear of having to do all that work in addition to everything they are doing.
I think there's something really interesting. I don't know but I'm wondering how much of this is cultural, because I think it's so funny because you're talking from like sort of an Indian, maybe more Asian perspective than where, and so I'm American, and you mentioned the suicide, and I was thinking the ego. Like I feel like so you strike me as somebody without a huge ego, and I can say that Richard and I, we know each other for a long time, and both of us actually don't have like just gigantic egos, but I think ego is the thing that takes people down a lot of times. They say this is not, the failure is me. Well, a business isn't you, because it never is you. You need so many people and support and all this, but people think it's me. I failed. I'm the failure. And this interesting that you mentioned also about the workload. I think that very often they don't like, because I also haven't really struggled with that. But I think they fail because of other reasons. It's not just, they're afraid that somebody will say, you don't like me. Imagine if you fire somebody, maybe they won't like me anymore. I'm not the cool boss anymore. And I think ego, interestingly enough, and I wonder if it's cultural. I don't know. I work in a language business. I think a lot about different cultures, basically, because that's what we do. We get things for people's local cultures, basically. We translate and we localize, actually. And do you think that, like, because I'm sure your experience and you've had like lots of exposure to different ways of thinking. Do you think there's an Eastern and a Western in this? Yeah,
absolutely. There's no doubt about that. Culturally, Asia is far more accepting and tolerant of individuals who may not be performing to their potential than I have seen, in say the UK or the US.
Right.
I remember when I was when I took over one of the satellite companies, it had, and this was when I was 37 years old, and I was, this had a huge office on Leicester Square. One of the main buildings which used to have McDonald's. The entire floor, 7,000 odd square feet, was the satellite technical office. And, the project had run into a problem for almost a year. The payments were being made. So I'd just taken over as the CEO, and I was told, go and, reduce overheads. And I think that's probably one of the most difficult 2 days that I spent, because I had to fire 60 technical people, all senior scientists and engineers. I was calling them in my office, handing them a letter of termination and giving them a check for 2 months' salary. And I know I went through some very, very serious soul searching on what am I doing, but I had to do that.
Right. It was
that was the only time I've done it, and I don't think I've ever had to do such a large firing it together.
I've done it, never to that extent because I didn't have such big organizations, but I've unfortunately done it. And from my perspective, again, it's for the company. What you're doing is you're doing what you have to. It's actually for the rest of the people that you need. It's really for the rest of the people in the company to survive and go forward. I mean, you have to take these tough decisions. I mean,
no, absolutely.
I have one thing. You guys are both strike me as very well educated. Like I'm just a regularly educated American guy, but you guys have like maybe the more premium educations. And I find this is for me one of the most interesting topics when it comes to entrepreneurship, because I'm sort of, and I know, and I can almost tell right now that you're definitely not going to be like this, but I'm sort of almost anti-education. I don't know what, like if you're going to be a medical doctor, you need to have an education, but for doing what we do, and let's say just for what you do, and maybe we need to talk about the second part of your journey, because you learned what you learned. You had your real education in the corporate world, I guess. How important is, like, what is your take on education? And actually to both of you, because I know Richard is also sort of very much, his father is an Oxford professor or was an Oxford professor. So Oxford, correct? It was Oxford, I think. Yeah. So what do you think, I mean, about that?
So, again,
you go first, Ashutosh.
Okay. In any traditional middle-class Indian family, and this has been there forever, education is the primary input that is given to every child. And even today, from the poorest families that you can look at, parents will put whatever they can into educating their child. And if, as you said, a child gets into, say, a medical college or into an engineering college, there are enough written about stories of parents selling land to pay for education. So maybe this is historical, where, we are a 5,000-year-old society and there has always been a focus on education. On the other hand, maybe it's because of the very large population that we have, and parents believe that being educated will create the differentiation for you to be able to succeed.
Right.
So therefore, education is an integral part of the entire nation of India. It's only now, and there has been a lot of discussions that have been going on over the last 20, 30 years. It's only now that the government has, for the first time, amended the education policy and said that after you finish your class 12, you should have the ability to stream yourself either into a craft that you are interested in. Everyone does not have to go for an undergrad, and everyone doesn't have to go for a postgrad, which used to happen. So education is very important.
But from entrepreneurship, actually, that's really what I was focusing on, the entrepreneurship side of it. Did it help you?
It did.
Okay.
It did.
Yeah. So I think that under the headline topic education, you get different things bundled up together, and it's knowledge of facts, and it's skills and competences, but then it's also character and values, and there's a huge difference between a good school and a bad school, and what the definition of a good school may be very irrelevant to the entrepreneurship journey, to the extent that I've often said that it's remarkable that at Winchester College, one of the oldest schools in the United Kingdom, and Cambridge University, I didn't have a single hour on personal effectiveness, on managing time, managing meetings, and getting things done. And if you think about and interpersonal skills, and if you think about the things that are really important for entrepreneurs, it's getting things done, interpersonal skills, and self-motivation. And so, you can have a good education which isn't relevant. However, I think if you have a well-designed entrepreneurship course, that can be extremely relevant, and it doesn't address all of the things you need, because it comes back to character and determination and internal motivation. And how do you teach someone to be highly motivated? That is an interesting
grit. They call it grit. How do you teach grit?
How do you teach grit and determination and resilience?
Yeah, I think the only way to teach grit is by the individual to learn it themselves. I don't think anyone can teach you. But, Kimon, just to answer your question on education for entrepreneurs, I used to teach a program on entrepreneurship at one of the top business schools in India. 2 years in a row, I ran a 13-class 2-hour program, or 2.5-hour program, which was almost a 35, 40-hour program that I taught. And what was important, and that's what my learning as an entrepreneur was, that in undergrad, if you want to study law, then you got to study all kinds of law, which is of no relevance, right? So therefore, for an entrepreneur, the Companies Act is far more important than studying about something else. What entrepreneurs are never taught are the importance of fundraising. What entrepreneurs are never taught is how to go through a term sheet when they're raising money, and what is the fine print in it. Now, those are all the important factors that must be taken into account if you're an entrepreneur, and that's what I was teaching for 2 years.
Yeah, that's practical. I agree. I see some practical thing. I guess I'm just thinking about the pure sort of what you did, sort of probably what I did, starting from literally nothing. Like you have nothing. You set up that one pharmacy and you started it from there. I just don't know that there's a whole lot of like lessons. I mean, I know, yeah, you need to know maybe some finance, marketing, but like there. I just find it hard. I think that's why so many of the real entrepreneurs you see, they don't even finish their college education. I mean, it's sort of, at least in the US, that's like, seems to be the story very often, that a lot of these people, when you go through the, like,
I've discussed it with many people, and I've had multiple, discussions on this one subject. I think what happens is that when one dropout becomes a billionaire, you make a virtue out of being a dropout.
Yeah, I don't think.
Actually, it's the reverse process.
I agree.
And if that is a message, and I've with American universities, and students I've spoken, and I've often said, while it's very important to say that this multi-billionaire or this multi-billionaire is a dropout, don't go that way. Think of the thousands of dropouts and where are they?
Yes. And there's no question about it. First of all, if somebody delves into why they dropped out, their business started to like boom. And then they said, I need to focus on this rather than on this. It makes a lot more sense. And I'm not either, just to be clear, I'm not suggesting people should drop out.
Okay.
I just think, because I actually am a believer in completion. I think you need to, if you start something, you should complete it. And I think that's part of the grit in the entrepreneurial journey as well. If you start something, you should finish it, basically. I mean, unless you're blowing through money or if it was a business, but still, correct. I guess I was just trying to say, I think about what I learned, and like, other than math, because I think math was kind of important, and I can figure stuff out and count like pretty well, and like calculate probability and percentages and stuff like that. That was a valuable skill in business. But other than that, I don't know that I learned anything in the whole process, of the education. But that's why I like to, but only for entrepreneurship. Let's be clear. I mean, like a lot of things, I think you actually, like an engineering or medical degree, that's clear.
I will follow up, Ashutosh. I'd like to learn more about your entrepreneurship teaching, because I do short courses in business schools to this day, and I'd love to learn and compare notes on what I think is important.
I'd be happy to. I'll just look for my program schedule of 13 classes, and I can send it to you.
That would be great. And I think one thing is project-based learning is one thing. It's actually learning by doing. You can actually build into a curriculum and give people projects. But a good example of the sort of thing that's hard to teach is simple things like, if you've got a small retail premises or a small office, even how do you manage the keys so that you're just like, to begin with, you've got the key and you're there, but then you think, well, I need to have a process for this, and it's not so simple. You can't just, can you give a key to everyone, and you start having to think, well, no, that's not very secure if everyone.
Resourcefulness. I mean, there's all these things that are.
And if you study facilities management and how to manage shopping centers and office blocks, that doesn't help. So there's a lot of practical skills. But I wanted to ask you about leadership and what views you've came to on that, because obviously in the corporate environment it's one kind of leadership, but it's a different thing taking a small individual pharmacy up to a larger organization. And did you have like a ready-made concept of what sort of leader you wanted to be and how you were going to lead, or is it something that you learned by doing? What sort of leader were you, and have you any reflections to share on that?
So I would say, let me talk of my leadership journey as an entrepreneur more. because, in the three large companies that I worked in, I mean, the leadership role was actually accumulation of previous year's experience, and your position and your stature was automatically established as you got more and more senior. But I think the leadership journey, when I started the firm with one individual, with me, and then built it up to an organization for over 1,200 people, I think that is where my years of experience had to be brought in. And the first thing that was important to establish was culture. Because when you're starting a new company and it's growing fast, you're getting people from multiple backgrounds, multiple organizations to come and work for you. And therefore, as a leader, it's very important to make sure that everyone starts thinking similarly and pulling in the same direction, right? So something as simple as marking one's attendance when you come into office, and you're using the little device where you put your thumbprint to make sure that you've, we'd gone past that little arm one, but we've got those digital biometric machines.
Time in attendance, whatever.
Yeah, so from something as simple as that to making sure that we celebrate all the successes. I would tell all the people that if there is good news and bad news, give me the bad news first, because don't hide things, because if you hide things, then it'll just get bigger and bigger, and ultimately it'll end up on my table in a situation where I won't be able to easily solve it. I was the oldest person in my team, so I also used to tell them that my job is to be a good goalkeeper. So I'm going to make sure that no one shoots goals into our side. Your job is to be able to take the ball and run and shoot goals on the other side, right? So I said, some other people, I would give a story of, my job is, you're driving at 100 kilometers per hour. And my job is to be there and clearing all the speed breakers so that, you don't break your axle when you go over a speed breaker very fast. And, so it was these kind of stories, which I used to keep talking about. I was there to be as empathetic as possible when individuals had any challenges or problems. And yet I was also very clear that, if on a Monday morning meeting, if the meeting time was 9 a.m. in the morning and all the leadership team had to be present, I had to be tough about it, because people would come in at 9:05, people would come in at 9:10, and the answer would be there was traffic or there was something else. Till one day I told the secretary of the company secretary, I said at 9 o'clock, bolt the door from inside. Whoever is cannot make it till 9 o'clock, will miss the meeting. I did it for 2 weeks. And after that, no one was ever late. All that it meant was leaving your home 10 minutes early on a Monday morning, because that's a commitment. So, it was a combination of a carrot and stick leadership. It was a combination of empathy and firmness. It was a combination of my learnings from the past, which was very, very large established kind of value systems, to developing my own set of values for a young organization that everyone would be able to empathize with and work with.
That makes a lot of sense.
How about efficiency? You just mentioned the meeting room, and I was thinking about the meeting goblin, whatever, the meeting monster that steals all your time and efficiency, and one of the famous ones. I don't think we ever implemented it here, but standing at meetings rather than letting people sit, so it's less comfortable.
No, I never tried that, but that's a great idea.
Any kind of things to keep it, because I agree with you about the timeliness. I wouldn't lock the door. I'd just start the meeting, and I don't care who wasn't at the meeting. So because it's always a bit awkward. You get the personal, like somebody comes in, it's like, we didn't wait for you. Sorry, we just started the meeting. So there is an automatic, whatever, you feel it. Like I'm sure it felt really bad not being able to open the door. But did you do anything? I don't know. Maybe you don't need to talk about meetings, but because I'd say that that's one of the biggest, like, process efficiencies, any kind of efficiencies, because I think that's what, like, the most successful companies are able to do. They add efficiencies into their processes, or into their, whether it's just the way they organize their time, as Richard would say, or the way they actually do their, would that be a focus of yours?
Process efficiency, Kimon, is an ongoing process. So let me explain to you one interesting thing. In a pharmacy, at 5 p.m. in the evening is when we used to see the maximum amount of traffic, and there would be, say, 30 people waiting to get their medicines. And we used to observe, and I used to stand there personally, and I remember these stories well, where if I gave my prescription to the pharmacist and said, okay, give me these 5 medicines, I would wait patiently till I could see all the medicines being taken out from the different boxes and being put onto the counter. The moment I saw that my medicines were there, then I was not willing to wait for more than 10 seconds to get my bill and make my payment. Now that used to create a lot of arguments saying, my medicines are there and the others are being served, etc. So we came up with a very simple solution. We put a little shelf at the bottom of this thing. So when the medicines were taken out, these small little trays would have the medicines and the customer couldn't see anything. And it removed all the challenges of people getting frustration and why is it taking so long? Because then he or she was waiting patiently because they wanted their medicine. So there were innumerable such instances that we went through. I mean, another interesting one, and I'm reminded of this because I see the world behind Richard. We used to have the invoice that used to be printed. Without thinking, I don't know if you've noticed, but the invoices can be very, very long. I mean, 5 items in your invoice could be as long as 12 inches. So we reverse engineered and we said, why are we wasting so much paper? And my IT head actually sat down and went through it. And we reduced the 12-inch invoice to just about, 5 inches or something. And when we calculated, we said the amount of paper that we had saved in 1 year would have taken that paper strip once around the moon. And so, these process efficiencies keep coming over and over again.
And that's and it's very important as a leader to show you care about these things. Like one thing is caring, the other is communicating it and setting an example. And certainly I've read and heard people say that in a startup, when you're establishing a business, the first focus is always making sure that you've actually figured out that the market wants what you're offering and making sure that it happens. And once you've got that basic product market fit, then the organization has to become obsessed about being efficient, because there will be other people, and it's only by, as you say, it's an ongoing process. Even today, some new technology will be invented that means that the old way of doing it is suboptimal. And so, did you have an efficiency council? Did you have any process within your organization to make sure that you were always looking for incorporating new technologies into the way you did things to make it better?
Yeah. So there was always a team of persons who were responsible for just making sure that in every area, and in a retail environment, the primary area of efficiency is on the shop floor or on the floor of the retail store. How do you ensure that your goods are your inventory is moving faster and your people are making sure that they're upselling, et cetera, et cetera. So it is an ongoing process with several people whose responsibility was to ensure implementation. And we also, of course, had the process where we would say that anyone who has an idea which can help improve, send it to me. And I used to look at these myself. And then we'd give it to the team and check it out if it was viable or not.
Okay, and I've got one of your books. I haven't read it yet, but I've read the back cover and the introduction. This is about how to retire. And I looked at on the back cover, it seemed like a lot of the things you're advocating, like rules for life, are the same as rules for business. And one of the interesting ones, the final one, was learn to live alone. And we talked, Keeman earlier was talking about the ego and how people are worried about what other people think. And I wonder, do you see the skills for life as being the same as the skills for business? And do you think and could you just reflect on why it's important to be happy when you're by yourself? Where does that come from? And is that a life skill or a business skill?
I would say it's both. I'm sure you've heard the old line, it's a very lonely job at the top. Whether it's an entrepreneur or it's the CEO of a major company, it is a lonely job. And most of us are constantly worried, and we discussed this a little earlier, about what other people think. Now, that was when we spoke earlier, it was in the context of a failure. But we also constantly are thinking, if I do something, will my action be judged by my friends or my neighbors or my colleagues? Right? So therefore, as an entrepreneur, it is very important to be able to be at peace with themselves alone. I think that's an important. And again, this is not binary. When I say be at peace with yourself, does not mean that I'm saying become a recluse and don't socialize
Actually,
at all.
I actually interpreted it, be prepared for your spouse to die because you're going to be alone one way or another. Either like you just when you're older, you need. That's how I interpreted it. Like,
correct. So the book that Richard is reading from is my book on retirement, and that in that book the context is very different, which is that as you start getting into retirement, one is when both you and your spouse are getting older, you need to give much more space to one another, because you've led busy lives throughout your life, and as you get older you need. But also, as what you just said, that if one of you goes away, the other person must learn to be able to live on their own.
Exactly. So, and it makes you feel more comfortable for the other spouse as well.
Absolutely.
Right? I mean,
absolutely. So it's both, learn to be, live by yourself as an entrepreneur for your own sanity of mind, and learn to live alone when you are left all by yourself. Because children go away, spouse goes away. What do you do?
I want to ask, I know we may be running out of time here, but I do ask one of my, again, the super interesting ones. I'm the guy asking the vague general ones.
No, please ask me.
It's about luck. How, because everybody, because you have the successful entrepreneur, and, and so many people want exactly what you've done. I mean, they want the career that you've had. And the question is always, how much of it was your own, ingenuity and hard work, and how much of it was just good fortune and luck in your story?
I would say, in every success story, there is a very substantial portion of luck. But when I say luck, I also mean that, every one of us are constantly getting opportunities. Now, I know of people who grab opportunities with grateful hands and then take the ball and run. There are others who let opportunities keep passing by, assuming that there are some better ones coming behind, right? So I think it's a combination of grabbing the right opportunities, and when you are going and running with the ball, then a lot of luck is needed so that you can keep, you don't hit stones and fall down, or the ball goes somewhere else. So it's a combination of a lot of factors.
Right.
I can't say that it's just hard work and because I am doing something. I mean, I've made, we can have a much longer podcast on where I failed, so.
Maybe we should start one that says where I failed.
Absolutely.
I'm sure it exists. When we were thinking of the name of this podcast, Keeman was brainstorming ideas, and I said, I'm sure someone else has thought of this title. And sure enough, every title we came up with, there were dozens of podcasts on that topic. But maybe we could invite you back in the future. It's not we're in charge of this channel, and obviously we're not going to get all topics into a single podcast, but there's an interesting paradox between being happy by yourself, but as an entrepreneur you have to be obsessed about what other people want. You're only going to be successful
Correct.
if you give customers and clients and organizations what they want. So there's that. So there is that paradox. But I wanted to jump onto your motivations. That if you look at the things you've done in your life, they've been quite different. Like serving the corporation and the corporation's clients, it's like one world. Your own business is another. Now on the brand of you and your authorship, you're serving like the anonymous viewer and the people you're interacting with. And is there a common theme to the things that you've chosen to do? And maybe in answering that question, you could reflect on your motivations for doing what you're doing now, this high volume interview series that you're putting a lot of time and effort into.
Okay, so I would say that the first job with India Tobacco was more from the perspective that, I'd got a great job. I was 21 and a half, and then I was delighted to be standing on my own feet and, earning my own money. And, that just helped me grow in the corporate career. As far as the motivation for my platform is concerned, I do believe that it is necessary for me in this my own necessity, to be able to give back. I think I've had a very, very, good life. And I believe that this is an opportunity for me to give back. And that is now, Richard Kimon, you're both podcasters, and I'm sure you look at your analytics. When I look at my analytics, I am amazed to see that more than 74% of my viewers and listeners are below the age of 34. Right? Now, what this tells me is that the young people are actually listening because they're getting some value out of it, right? I'm still not getting a lot of feedback, but I do get 2 or 3 messages every day from people who tell me they loved it, right? So I think these messages that are going back to people is important. What is also very important is when I'm consciously reaching out to people across the world, because I believe that is one way I'll begin to get heard all over the world. And I am getting heard in at least, I think, about 45 or 46 countries. But again, if you look at the analytics, we started from India. About 66% of my listeners are in India. 22% are in the US. 3.5%, 4% are in the UK. And the balance is spread across the other countries. So what I think I'm beginning to do is to start giving back to a lot of people, to a lot of the listeners, some knowledge lessons. And now we are beginning to curate, extracts from multiple guests and combining them into one 10, 12-minute podcast, which is by subject. So example, one question I've asked every single entrepreneur is, what do you think are the basic mistakes startup entrepreneurs make? Now, I have 200 answers to this one question, and each answer is between 1.5 to 2 minutes. So now, can you imagine? I've got 400 odd minutes of such answers. I can combine it into 10-minute slots, which we did experiment with, and one of the major Indian newspapers has started putting it out on their podcast platform. Basic mistakes people make. Is it good to be, is it good for an entrepreneur to go solo, or should you have a co-founder? What are the steps you need to look out for when you're raising money, and so on?
Very interesting. Well, in the follow-up, I'll ask for a few links to some of that, because I think some of these things, people listening to this might be interested in clicking on a link and seeing that. But is it, obviously you're giving a platform to other people in asking your questions.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're doing this, there's always the question of like the reflected ego. If you hang out with other people look at you. And if you think about the ideas that are your ideas, are there particular things that you think, well, if someone really studies what I've written and what the interviews I've done, are there a few things? Is there one thing or 3 things that the Ashutosh message that you'd like to get across to your audiences?
Number one is, I have never been worried about, I'd say, when copying what I'm doing, because I've always said that if someone is copying me, that means what my message is working, right?
Yeah, copying is the best form of flattery.
Correct, right? And success. So if someone is beginning to copy what I'm doing, then my model is obviously working. So I think that is one very important factor. The other factor is that if, when it comes to knowledge, and when it comes to being a thought leader, I don't think too many people can just copy what you are saying. Because when you're talking without a piece of paper, when you're talking without any kind of prompts, then only if it is there inside you will you be able to speak so openly and honestly. Otherwise, I would constantly be looking at what my next answer should be. So I think, especially when it comes to things like, and again, I must add a qualifier, which is that I'm not doing anything which is rocket science. I'm not doing anything which is something which will have severe IPR issues, or create some kind of problems in my own wealth. So if I can figure out a way for it to be spread across multiple people, so be it.
Very good. as Keeman said, we're drawing towards the end. But if you think about where this journey is going to take you, with your different business, you exited the corporate career, you exited your pharmacy retail business, and you had a vision to be the Boots of India. Do you have a vision of where your podcast and YouTube channels are going to end up? Like, is there a destination that when you achieve that goal, you'll think, yes, I've done this now, and you'll stop and move on to something else, or could you carry on doing this till the day you die?
Well, I don't know about till the day I die, but I certainly think for the next 2 years I would like to do this, because I'm actually enjoying the incredible conversations I have with so many people. I mean, I've had spoken to an incredible range of people, from sportsmen to politicians to business leaders to entrepreneurs, and this is across the world. And you may recall that I was, for example, I asked you a question, what success means to you. In my first season, I used to ask this question, what is your biggest learning from your biggest failure? And I actually was able to use the lockdown period to write a new book. So I was telling my wife the other day, I said, well, I've got so much data on what success means. Maybe it's time for me to write a new book on what is success, about success, So there's a lot of great stuff available. I've always had this philosophy or thinking that if when I wake up in the morning and I say, oh no, I've got to get back to work again, that's the time when I need to change. And as of now, I certainly look forward to the 3 days when I do my interviews. And I haven't reached that stage that, why am I doing these interviews? The day that happens, I think that's when I will look for a change.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Well, if you make it to, if I'm living in Krakow, Keeman's still living in Krakow, if you make it to Krakow, it'd be very nice to have a meal together. And
I look forward to that.
I'd invite you to my house if we're allowed to meet face to face. I hope the virus will be behind us. Keeman's a keen golfer, so I would suggest.
Yeah, I was gonna. If we had had more time, I would have gone down that route. But we'll leave that. I'll take you. Okay, if you come here, I'll take you golfing. How does that sound? There's a very good course. There's a very good course here.
Okay, and that offer holds from my side also. So it'll be reciprocated if you come to India. And I mean, I have been to Krakow. You haven't been to India, so maybe it's time for you to.
Yes, I would love. I've never been to India. I'm very. I will actually for sure be in India at some point in my life.
We spent about 4 days in Krakow because from there we went to Auschwitz, Birkenau, the mines, salt mines or whatever they call it, salt mines. So we spent some time there. It's a beautiful city.
Yes, so for anyone listening who's wondering, visit India as we haven't done, and where you live, visit Krakow, where Keeman and I are, and
I look forward.
There are some projects that I think I highlighted to you when we were last speaking that I'd like to follow up on, but that's not the topic for today. So, sure. Keeman, do you have any final question?
No, thank you for the time. I mean, really fascinating, really interesting. These things, you always feel like you could go on forever, basically, because how come to get to distill your life and your experience in an hour is hard, but I thought it was really interesting. I appreciate your time. Thanks for that.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
So this is Richard and Keeman and Ashutosh saying, and to our listeners, thank you very much for giving us the time and attention, because time is the one resource you can't buy more of. We appreciate your attention. If you like this podcast, please introduce other people to it, give us a positive review and share it. And we look forward to meeting you next time. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you again.
Thanks.